morning and welcome to Lifestyle Gardening. I'm Kim Todd and thanks for joining us for our last show of this season. Today we're going to be looking at the importance of pollinators with features on a new educational landscape here on campus. We'll also hear about how you can create a habitat for these important insects around your home. We'll also be hearing from Dennis Ferraro about the importance of bats and how to keep them out of your attic, as well as helping you figure out your fruit tree schedule for the year. Let's start today's program with UNL Entomology Assistant Professor Doug Golick, who will take us on a tour of a recently installed structure and garden that helped promote the importance of pollinators. Here's Doug to tell us more.
This is our Pollinator Garden and outdoor classroom. And really what we originally conceived of was a space that people could come to learn in an actual environment about pollinators and their conservation. When I talk about pollinators, I not only mean bees, but I mean butterflies and other beneficial insects that live in that community. And so we have about a third to fourth acre of a plot here that is divided into 4 sections. The first being a larval habitat primarily for butterflies and moth with a number of plantings that is actually sacrificial plants for the growing insects to eat. We've got a berry plot that contains berry bushes and shrubs, and that's to show the food connection. Then we've got a majority of the habitat is actually a managed prairie that we have worked with Stock Seeds in Murdoch, Nebraska to help seed and plant and come up with a seed mix for this location. And there's over 40 blooming plants that might be growing in the habitat over the next 5 years as this habitat ages and goes through that cycle of restoration for a prairie here. And then we've got 5 grasses that hopefully also will come up as well to give it that nice prairie landscape look. And then the other habitat that I'm very proud of is the water-wise pollinator friendly section. We live in a state from east to west that varies a lot in rainfall. And so the idea behind the water-wise and pollinator-friendly plot is to look at the plant types that are beneficial for pollinators, but also grow well here in Nebraska with periods without rain. So we're doing some research and some demonstration of these plant varieties that contain native and non-native plants that we might be planting and testing out in those habitats. Well, this is called the comb, and it's a native bee habitat. And it's about 18 foot long and about 6-8 foot wide. And this structure was conceived from a concept that we saw that other people had done in Europe to create native bee houses. So it's largely decorative, but if you notice in the back, it has these honeycomb shapes. Some of these have backers on it, and we'll stuff that with reeds and twigs and actually reused wood that we'll drill holes into in different sizes that native bees will nest in. And so it's actually a living native bee house that you can walk into and experience the actual structure, and it's a great part of the landscape. The other aspect to this is when we thought of this design, we borrowed a design from Europe, and we worked with Prairie Gold Homes, which is actually a job transition program for prisoners in the state penitentiary here in Nebraska. Well, pollinators do provide pollination benefits and pollination to about 1/3 of the food that we eat. So we should all be, understanding that pollinators are critical to our food system. The other aspect of this is there's been a lot of focus on protecting pollinators in the last 8-10 years because our honeybee has fallen on some tough times. The population has drastically gone down into what we call a symptom or colony collapse disorder. And because of that, people want to do something for pollinators. So we want to make sure people are doing things in their home landscape because a lot of our population in Nebraska lives in an urban environment. And so it's an opportunity for people to quote unquote crowdsource pollinator conservation. And if we could get everybody to do a little patch of blooming flowers that bloom throughout the year in their home gardens, that would be one of the simplest things we can do. The other aspect of this that we all, if we live in an urban landscape, tend to do is over-fertilize and spray pesticides when we don't need to. So we always practice what we do here in Extension, Nebraska, is smart pesticide and other management uses in the home landscape. And that includes things like integrated pest management, which is first identifying whether you need a problem, or if you have a problem, whether it's weed or insect problem in your home landscape, before you do anything in it, and then determine by working with your local extension specialists and educators on what you should be doing in your home landscape.
The structure and landscape are open to the public, but it does take a little guidance around East Campus to find it. If you're interested in visiting this wonderful educational property, feel free to contact the entomology department here at UNL. Perhaps some of you have had the fun and exciting experience of opening your attic door and welcoming a few friends into your home. Well, bats might be friends to some people, but for the most part, we want them out in the open so they can eat all the insects they can find and not live in our attics. It's important to remember that bats are beneficial if they stay out of your home. Here to tell us about some effective ways of keeping them out is our wildlife specialist, Dennis Ferraro.
Did you know that Nebraska has over 13 species or different types of bats? And over 8 of them really don't leave the state. They're here year-round. So that means they hibernate someplace in Nebraska. Lots of times that's in people's homes. Now, of our 13 bats, 2 or 3 are about the only ones people ever see, and about the only ones that will really get into a home and cause any kind of nuisance problems. How do we control bats? Well, one, we really don't need to control bats. We just need to stop them from getting to places we don't want them to be. And that's like in your home, maybe around your porch, around your home, flying over your swimming pool, or dive bombing an area where there's water, like a bird bath in your backyard. So we really want to stop those things from occurring, but we don't want to really get rid of any of the bats. Bats are beneficial. They eat tons of moths and wasps and other flying insects, and they even eat some mosquitoes. Now, why would they get into a home? Well, there's 2 reasons. In the summer, they hang around a home because there's food. The light emitted through your window brings in moths and attracts mosquitoes and other flying insects. You have a porch light. You always notice flies and other insects are flying around those porch lights in the summer. Well, that is a buffet to the bats. When bats get into the home, it could be to overwinter or it could be accidental. There's 2 main times people find bats in the home. One, when they're getting into the home to hibernate, which is usually the end of the summer in the fall, or when the young of the year, which is usually the end of July, beginning of August, enter the home because they're trying to find new locations. So the best way to keep bats out is exclusion. There are no toxicants or baits, sprays, any repellents. Most university tests, including UNL's tests, show the repellents hardly work at all and not very effective and not really the right amount of money spent for what you can get. The best thing is spending your money on exclusion. Now a bat, they have bones just like any other vertebrate, but they can squeeze in with their small bones into small locations. So let's just say that this is an area in your house where you have a slit that goes in the attic or in some other part of the home. Even the basement they may want to get into. So what you would normally do, if this is a slit, you can hang this there. The reason why you just don't want to caulk or seal that slit, you want to make sure all the bats are out of the attic, whether it's summertime or any other time. Now, in the winter, the bats won't move back and forth. So in the summer and the spring, the bats will be moving back and forth to get water, and they dive over ponds, they dive over pools. So you can put this area, this material, it's just bird netting. The bats will come out, hit the netting, drop down, and fly away for the day or evening to feed. When they come back, they try to get in. They can't. And after about 3 or 4 weeks of having the netting, and remember, this would have to be after July. We always say, let them fly till July. That way you won't trap any young in the attic. And this is going to be the big difference with these some bats being endangered or threatened in our state. You're not going to be able to exclude them out until after July. That way everybody's sure the babies can move on their own and the mothers in the nursery. So if you wait till July and put the netting, almost all of them will come out within a week's time. Then you can caulk up and seal this. If you want to remove the bats, there's some other ways you can use it, kind of the same way. If you have a bigger hole, you can make that hole smaller. The bats will come out, but they'll have a hard time figuring out how to come in. So you have a hole, you nail this to the hole, the bats come out all during July. By August, you seal up the hole, and your problem is solved. Now remember, exclusion's the best thing. Some people like to build bat houses. These will not keep them out of your area, but it also attracts them to your area and allows more bats to be in your area. So remember, exclude the bats after July, and if you want to keep the bats around the area but don't want them in your house, think about building a bat house.
If you have a bat problem in your attic, the last thing on your mind is how beneficial they can be around the house. So it's going to be a priority to make a plan to get them out and keep them out. It's a matter of regularly checking your home for outside cracks and holes and keeping them filled up, or at least using the mesh that Dennis mentioned. Okay, let's change the subject and let's turn our attention to fruit trees. If you have some of these around your home, you know there's nothing like a fresh, juicy peach or an apple off the tree around harvest time. The rewards of that fresh fruit are obvious, but it does take a little work at the right time to get the best harvest. We talked with Extension Educator Connie Fisk about common insect and disease problems and how timing can be everything when it comes to your fruit trees. It's my pleasure to welcome Connie Fisk, and she's going to be talking to us about one of the hottest topics that we get on Backyard Farmer during the regular season, so it's really appropriate for us to talk about it during the winter show. And that would be fruit trees, small fruits in the garden. Connie, we get a lot of questions during the regular Backyard Farmer show about common pests and diseases of fruit trees and now shrubby fruits in the landscape, and which sorts of fruit trees they attack. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, there are several different pathogens that attack our fruit trees. Apple trees get some different diseases than the stone fruits, the peaches and nectarines and cherries, things like that. So it's important to know the difference between the diseases. Some of the bad ones for apple are apple scab, and it affects both apple and pear. Then we have cedar apple rust, which cedar trees are an alternative host. So if you have cedar trees in your yard, you're likely to see this on your leaves. And it's a really weird looking gall, kind of looks like aliens have been in your yard. And what happens then is that it can cause defoliation, which really weakens the tree. So that's something to think about if you're thinking of putting in an apple, is considering how many cedar trees you have nearby. Then we have some fruit rots. We have black rot and bitter rot and things like that are going to rot the flesh of the fruit. You wouldn't want to even make applesauce out of if you get those. And we'll see more of those in a wet year for sure. And then we have sooty blotch and fly speck, and that's really just something that affects the skin of the apples. And so you can still go ahead and eat those, but you wouldn't be able to sell them at the farmer's market, for example. Then with the peaches, we get things like leaf curl, which again is going to affect the leaves and therefore how much fruit that tree can give and how strong that tree will be going into the winter. So those are some things that we really want to look for in our fruit trees. And then when we look at things like grapes and brambles, we're looking at things like powdery mildew. Again, it's going to be a lot worse in a wet year.
Of course, their next question is, when do they control these beasties and these diseases, and how do they control them? And since the regular show starts typically in April, the question is, are they really already too late to do effective control of some of them?
Yeah, you're exactly correct there. A lot of these diseases, we need to start spraying early in the season. Once you see the disease, it's already too late. It's already there. So a lot of these start with sanitation in the fall before. So getting those leaves picked up, any fruit that's on the ground, any mummified fruit that's up in the tree still, we want to get those out in the fall because they're going to be the inoculum for the disease in the following year. So that's key in the fall to get that sanitation taken care of. Then we have some sprays that do go on in the dormant season and some more that go on just at that green tip stage. So before the buds even open, but they just start turning green. And so it's really important to check the spray guides that are available online to know at what stage to treat which disease. So you know if you had a disease last year, you need to start treating it early.
Connie, people go into the garden center or the box stores and they see all sorts of products on the shelf with names like three-way, horticultural oil, dormant oil, combination spray product, and they probably don't know in most cases what they should be using in their particular situation. Can you give us a little bit of general guidance on how to direct them in the right way?
It really depends on what pest you're trying to treat for. So there are certain horticultural oils, dormant oils, that are very useful during the dormant season for treating things like mites that are going to overwinter on the bark. And what the oils do is they smother those pests. And so those are really useful. The problem with the three-way products is that they're treating more than one problem. So if you don't have three problems, you don't need to be using a three-way product. And so it's usually more cost-effective to buy the single product to treat the disease or insect pest you have.
And of course, on Backyard Farmer and during the winter show, we really like to give people the integrated pest management method first, the least damaging, of course. And we have a lot of people who do want to try to grow things either like that or control things in an organic way. Are there possibilities with fruit trees and shrubby fruits in the landscape that they could take that approach?
Definitely. So as I mentioned before, there's a lot of things we do culturally that help reduce disease and insect pressure. So planting in the right location to begin with, so you have good sunlight, good air exposure to the canopy. Make sure you do annual pruning every year. The annual means every year. So again, that you've got the sunlight and the air exposure in that canopy. So if you're pruning out fire blight, for example, to be able to get all those prunings out of the orchard, out of your yard, burn them, get rid of that so that the inoculum doesn't re-enter that canopy. So those are things that are simple, free, just take a little bit of your time to take care of. And then as far as organic options, a lot of our diseases of fruits can be treated organically. So we have Bordeaux mix, for example, wettable sulfur, all the copper products, all those are available in organic products. And so you're able to treat most of the diseases that are going to affect your backyard fruit organically.
Connie, thanks a bunch. It really is hard during the regular season to be able to answer people's questions when in fact we may be a little bit behind the 8 ball on this one.
Well, thanks for having me.
As winter winds down and warmer weather will soon be on the way, take a minute to come up with a strategy for pruning and spraying your fruit trees and the other fruit-bearing plants around your garden. You can also take advantage of your local extension office for publications or to discuss the best practices with your educator. And there is a wealth of really good extension publications available online to help you get the best harvest year after year. Speaking of fruit trees, one of the things we heard Connie talk about was good circulation in around your trees. For this week's landscape lesson, Extension Horticulture Assistant Terry James talks about a method to help air circulation in young fruit trees.
Homeowners are bringing more and more into their backyard to get that great fresh taste of fruits and vegetables. Apples are one thing that most homeowners really like to add into their backyard. Urban homeowners can look for both ultra-dwarf or semi-dwarf. They're going to get between 10 and 15 feet tall, so they're going to be perfect for your backyard space. When you're looking for a good apple tree, you're going to look for a good central leader, and you're also going to look for some scaffold branches that are going to be kind of whirled around the base of your tree. You're also going to make sure that you're not seeing any blemishes on any of the trunk or the branches. If you do find some on some branches, you may have to prune some of those out when you first plant them. When you buy an apple tree, you're going to have to definitely make sure that you're in the game to do some pruning. Pruning will happen normally in the winter during the dormant season, but you will do some summer pruning just in case there's any wind damage or too heavy load fruit damage that might pull some of those branches down and crack some of those. If you do have to do a little bit of pruning when you first get your apple tree home, you're going to have to do some lateral cuts and some heading back cuts. The heading back cuts are going to take it from the top leaders and kind of pull that tree down a little bit, so it's going to actually be a little bit shorter. Your lateral cuts are going to be that whirl around that center, so make sure that you don't have any crossing branches. You're only going to want 3 to 5 and make sure that they're kind of not crossing each other and they're being a little bit staggered throughout the area.
Those early pruning cuts are an effective way to help your new apple trees thrive at early growth stages, but they also will be beneficial as the tree grows into maturity. Think twice, cut it once. This also comes into play when you're selecting a tree to purchase by looking at the branch structure. The better the branching structure, the less you're going to have to prune later, and you really cannot correct some of the bad problems by pruning. Let's take a few minutes now to answer our viewer email. We'd love to hear from you, and perhaps you can share a picture or two with us. Just send us an email to byf@unl.edu. Our first question comes from the Alliance area, and it could come from anywhere in the state because we are just upon Valentine's Day. This is a question that has to do with moth orchids. It is actually one of the easiest orchids to grow and to care for, and should come from wherever that supplier was in the correct media, because one of the things that will kill an orchid is poor drainage or soggy soil. You never want to put them in a soil situation that is like a potting soil. They need to be in their own mix. They also really will thrive being root bound, and they are a plant that is an epiphyte, meaning they kind of have these aerial root things. Once the plant has flowered, you can do a couple of things. You may be able to get it to reflower by cutting off that spent stem just above a joint or a bud. More importantly, what you want to do is make sure that you give the orchid warm enough conditions so you'll keep it in bloom, but not too warm. You can kind of think that if we're comfortable, it's comfortable. If it's over 80 degrees, that's a little bit too much. They like a lot of humidity, so 60 or 70% if you can give it to them. They like an indirect light, a little bit of part shade, because if they're in too much moisture, too much sunlight, they may actually sunburn a little bit. People will try to winter them over or take them outside in the coming season and then get them to rebloom again. We have questions really from all over the state, but this one is from the Grand Island area about what to do about storm damaged trees. This of course goes back to that whammy of anywhere from 0 inches in Beatrice to 18.5 inches in Grand Island, and it was the heavy wet snow that can really do a lot of damage to trees. So a couple of schools of thought on this. First off, always in pruning, if it is a hazard, if that branch is a widowmaker, if it's hanging over a sidewalk, it's hanging over a car, in a situation where it could fall and twist and hurt somebody, you want to get that out of the tree as soon as possible. If it's too high up in the tree or it's too large of diameter, for heaven's sakes, call in a certified arborist to do the work. Don't try to do it yourself. And you want to make sure that that pruning cut is done properly. Another situation, though, is if a branch has broken and dropped and it's lying kind of out of the way and there's really nothing left in the tree, you may want to go ahead and leave that stub until we are a bit closer to the break of dormancy and then go ahead and clean it off. You want to clean back beyond the point of the damage or the injury, and in some cases, depending on the species of tree, that tree will shoot another set of buds and kind of replace that foliage. A couple of the images that we have actually show part of the reason that we get that kind of storm damage has to do with a lack of structural integrity in the branch itself. And you can really see the dark streaking that is the decay that is set in, whether that was a wound from a squirrel or hail damage or mechanical injury. A little bit hard to tell, but you can see that that is really exactly just where that tree broke. The other thing that we see in the landscape a lot is if a tree, when it is young, is grown with what we call included bark, where the bark turns back in on itself, there is no connection between those two trunks or those two branches. So it's a turning in rather than a pushing out, and as each one of those trunks or branches expands in diameter, they get bigger and bigger and bigger, and that lack of connection gets greater. We'll see whole sides of trees fall off when that happens. So yet another really good reason to do some pruning. And again, the storm damage pruning, think first about safety and second about tree health on that. We spend a lot of time during the backyard farmer season talking about controlling insect pests. It's true that insects can cause some serious problems when you're trying to grow healthy vegetables and ornamentals, but the flip side to this is that we need a wide variety of insects to help pollinate our plants. For our final feature today, UNL entomology professor of practice Tom Weisling shares with us the importance of pollinators and how to help them thrive in and around our gardens.
It's a really exciting day here in the garden. It's a nice warm afternoon. It's sunny, it's clear. We just followed a few really hot days. And the reason it's exciting is because I'm looking around and this place is just teeming with insects, not pest insects, some really good insects. I see a few predators. I'm seeing a lot of pollinators out. I'm seeing flies that are pollinating. I'm seeing butterflies go by. And I'm seeing an awful lot of bees. Now, in the United States, there's about 3,500 different species of bees, different types of bees. And almost all of them are native bees. The rest of them are a few imported species, like the imported European honeybee. Now, all of these collectively do an incredibly good job of pollinating our crops and plants. As a matter of fact, the overall industry is several $billion of importance from pollinators. And if you just take the native bees, just the ones that are out on their own pollinating, it's over $3 billion worth of value. And that's pretty amazing, considering that we don't have to manage these bees like we do for the European honeybees. But as we talked about before, declines of bees, native bees and honeybees, are impacting pollination. And the reason the native bees have been in decline is for a lot of reasons that the imported honeybee is in decline. And that's because of loss of habitat and sometimes pesticide use. Inadvertently, if we see an insect on a plant, we may accidentally spray it because we're not sure what it's doing. We think it's a pest. But if we know it's a bee, we shouldn't be spraying the plant. We've talked about that a little bit. And it's important to promote the levels of these things as much as we can to aid in this natural pollination, unmanaged pollination of these plants. Now, out of these 3,500 different species that we have, different types of native bees, about 2/3 of them actually nest in the ground. We've talked about the ones that nest in tubes, like in our little bee hotel back here, but there's also ones that will dig their own holes in the ground, and they do a really good job of doing the excavation. They line the tunnel, and then they fill that with the brood, just like they do back in our little bee hotel back here, except it's in the ground. So it's important, if you want to promote ground nesting bees, instead of mulching the entire area, leave some bare ground. And bees will start to excavate that and use that. So it's important to provide habitat for all these bees, always have plants flowering year round, and have places where they can do their nesting. And all of these factors together will help support the bumblebee population and improve it through time.
A diverse garden full of blooming flowers is not only beautiful, it's a great way to invite these important insects to do what they do best, pollinate your plants. Keep these tips in mind to help you reduce your chemical usage and have a bountiful harvest of fresh fruits and vegetables. We've really had a great time this winter with lifestyle gardening. If you missed any programs, be sure to go to the Backyard Farmer YouTube channel and watch the program, and perhaps check out all the other wonderful features offered. In just a few short weeks, the growing season begins, and that means Backyard Farmer will be with you to help answer your gardening questions. Until then, good morning, good gardening, and we'll see you all next winter on Lifestyle Gardening.